everybody's off for a day's holiday on International Women's Day, as they are indeed in Russia and many other parts of the world, but not here. I'll be talking, as I said, to Patrick Mercer, one of the Tory MPs that I regularly have on the show because he's very good value and a very stand-up kind of guy. And Patrick was one of the first to call for a no-fly zone over Libya. I'm strongly against a no-fly zone over Libya. So we're going to have a debate about that very subject. Now, Patrick Mercer, a fine fellow, an upstanding MP, Conservative MP for Newark, was one of the first to call for a no-fly zone over Libya. Let's see if he's changed his mind in any way. Patrick, welcome to the show, my friend.
George, good evening. Very nice to speak to you.
And you, sir. Now, the arguments for a no-fly zone presumably revolve around the fact that Gaddafi's winning the war.
Well, my initial arguments were that we were going to try and constrain Gaddafi. Things have evolved and things have changed, not least of which is the understandable, and I have to say very sensible, American reluctance to get involved. I perhaps naively assumed that the Americans would be up for it, perhaps without having thought about that as carefully as clearly the Americans have. The fact remains, I think we may now be too late.
I think that may well be true. The Germans weren't much up for it either. Do you think, therefore, that the British government, David Cameron, William Hague, were speaking rather too loosely, as the Americans put it?
Well, the Americans were pretty harsh in their condemnation of the Prime Minister's words, which I think
loose talk, they called it.
Yeah, they did call it loose talk, or at least they referred to that. They made an oblique reference to that,
yeah.
And Mr. Gates made an oblique reference to that. It's a bit tricky to know, isn't it? I think the idea, as I say, was a good idea, but I think probably its utility has now passed. And I think the Americans pointed out the fact that, born of the experience of the Iraq experience, that to start a successful no-fly zone, of course, you have to carry out a series of really quite savage attacks. In those savage attacks, there is with very, very little doubt that there will be collateral damage and civilian injuries. And of course, that throws the whole thing in the post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan climate of international operations, throws a rather different light on it.
Yeah, well, we're not going to have an argument about that because we're now on the same page on that. So just before I move on to the bigger question, I can't quite let you off the hook on this point because...
Please don't, George.
David Cameron and William Hague have had a disastrous war. First of all, William Hague claimed that Gaddafi was on a plane to Venezuela, which was a ludicrous falsehood, which he'd clearly bought off a guy with a carpet bag somewhere, some Elmer Gantry. It could not possibly have been hard intelligence because it couldn't be true for a number of reasons and wasn't true. And now we've got David Cameron out there in the Middle East with a lot of arms dealers following the trail of these revolutions, trying to sell them British weapons. Then we have this loose talk. I mean, it's been a pretty grisly run of bad luck, at least.
Well, George, I think it's fair to say that it's been bad luck, and I think, heavens above, you're a much more experienced politician than I am, and you'd know as well as anybody else that you need good luck and you need things to be fortunate. I can't account for the Venezuelan business. I just don't understand that, and I dare say that William Hague doesn't understand it either. I think it was unfortunate. But there has been a series of other incidents which, put together, don't look too great. But at least we have a government that is willing to get involved in these things in, I think, a responsible way and in a measured way. And therefore, we didn't go storming in as Tony Blair's government might have done, for instance. And I don't want to make political play out of this because I think it's much more important than that. What I would say, George, is that, and I'm not doubting the need to try and save money in terms of defence expenditure. But we are now looking at a strategic defence and security review, which frankly seems a bit hollow with the events in the Middle East. And nobody that I know, anyway, you may tell me I'm wrong, George, but nobody that I knew was in any way capable of foretelling what was going to happen, or the equipment, or indeed the diplomatic resources that we were going to need for it.
Yours truly was predicting the wave of revolutions, but leave that to one side. Patrick, you're a military man, a very experienced and skilled one, a former officer. You know the smell of cordite. You're looking at the same pictures as me. Is Gaddafi going to win this war, and how long does it look like it's going to take him?
First and foremost, George, if you predicted the revolutions in some detail, then I'm not aware of that, and I admire you for that. Second point, the business with Gaddafi, I don't know, but I think it's probably fairer to call it an uprising rather than a war. A few days ago, I was talking to journalists who were saying, "Gosh, he's going to go within hours. We're going to see the back of Gaddafi." I don't think we are. I think we're going to see a brutal put down of the revolution, the uprising, the insurgency, call it what you will. And I think we're going to see Gaddafi on his throne, if that's the right phrase, for the foreseeable future. What the Allies or the Western Alliance is going to do about it, I don't know. But to preempt, I hope, what your next question is going to be, George, what we've got to understand now, as both politicians, diplomats, soldiers, whatever, everybody's got to understand, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And that Libya is this week's problem. What is next week's and next month's problem?
Sure.
Where are our resources going to be needed next? Because I can probably guess, but I'm not sure.
Well, we've now got the worst of all possible worlds. We built up Gaddafi, then we turned against him, then he won. And
George,
so now all the investments that we made, that Blair paved the way for, are going to be lost as Gaddafi takes revenge on the countries that tried very hard to overthrow him. And the rebels that we encouraged are going to be massacred. And Gaddafi is going to be in power in an oil-rich country, and we're not going to be able to trade with them or invest with them because we've blackguarded them in the way that we have. I mean, it really all adds up to a foreign policy disaster.
Things are not looking great, and it's extremely difficult to see how we could have avoided them. But what we've got to be very clear about is that and I'm not just talking about our military resources, but our national resources are already heavily tied up in Afghanistan. Pakistan, rightly or wrongly. Now we are making a considerable investment in what I can probably best describe as the containment of Gaddafi. How are we going to cope with the next problem? Where are the ships, the aircraft, the diplomats, the politicians, the aid? Where's that going to come for next week's problem? Probably, I guess, in Saudi Arabia or Yemen.
Well, it would be better to stay out with aircraft, ships, boots and saddles, Patrick. That's the long and the short of it. Patrick Mercer, an officer and a gentleman, and the Tory MP for Newark. Thanks very much, as always, for joining us. 08717 223344. Where do you stand on Gaddafi?